Welcome. You're listening to the Malcontent News Russia-Ukraine War podcast, the show that cuts through the fog of war and updates you about the ongoing conflict in Ukraine. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and Google Podcasts.
Hello, I'm Marina Yevshan, your host of the Russia-Ukraine War Report podcast, and today is June the 13th, 2024. It has been 3,790 days since Russia started covert military operations in Crimea, 10 years and 114 days since the start of the Russia-Ukraine war, and 2 years and 111 days since Russia expanded its war of aggression. Today's podcast looks at events that happened on Wednesday and Thursday morning. During the podcast, you will find the Russia-Ukraine war map helpful to visualize the areas discussed. A link is in the podcast description. There are map updates today. The Russia-Ukraine War Report is compiled by our team from around the world. Today's report includes information from our direct contacts and journalists in Ukraine, the Russian Ministry of Defense, the General Staff of the Armed Forces of Ukraine morning reports, operational commands north, south and east of Ukraine, open source intelligence, our in-house team of analysts and geospatial experts, and pro-Ukrainian and pro-Russian mail bloggers and social media channels with a track record of trying to be accurate. We have one mission, the truth, because the truth matters. Here is my daily assessment. 1. We assess that Russia's ongoing spring-summer offensive failed to achieve any of its operational goals after 54 days and has reached its end. 2. The sharp increase in aggressive acts by the Russian Federation directed at the NATO alliance and its member nations is a direct result of the failed policy of de-escalation and excessive fear of Moscow's tactical nuclear threats. We maintain the world is caught in the mutually assured destruction and stability paradox. 3. Russia is setting conditions to commit further acts of aggression in Europe. 4. Russia's sustained attacks on Ukraine's energy infrastructure, which has destroyed 80% of its combined thermal and power plant capacity, is a continuation of Russian crimes against humanity that started in October 2022, as outlined in 2 arrest warrants issued by the International Criminal Court on March 5th. 5. In our assessment, the quantity of artillery ammunition available to Ukrainian frontline units is reaching a level where stabilization of existing defensive lines has started. We further assess the situation will continue to improve. 6. Russia's trampling of international humanitarian law has been accelerating since March 22nd. We maintain that the willful ignoring of blatant Russian war crimes by international watchdogs is encouraging escalation. 7. Autocrat Putin has started the largest purge of the Russian Ministry of Defense, led by the FSB, since Joseph Stalin's 1936 to 1938 purge. 8. The attacks on Ukraine's energy infrastructure have incrementally increased the chance of an intentional nuclear accident at multiple nuclear facilities in Ukraine. Only able to hit one area of critical infrastructure and unable to find success on the battlefield, Russia predictably went back to its alternate strategy, targeting civilians. In a daytime attack designed to maximize casualties, at least one Russian Iskander-M short-range ballistic missile struck a residential area in Kryvyi, destroying and damaging 41 apartment buildings and 2 schools. 9 people were killed and 32 wounded, including 5 children. Recovery operations finished in the evening of June the 12th, and June the 14th is declared a day of mourning in Kryvyi. It was the worst Russian strike on a civilian target since the May the 25th bombing of the epicenter hypermart in the city of Kharkiv. The VKS, that's the Russian Aerospace Forces, bombed the village of Stary Saltiv in the Kharkiv Oblast, wounding 3 civilians aged 59 to 67. Russian rockets also struck Kurilivka, wounding 2 civilians. Russian shelling of the village of Kutkivka, northwest of Kupiansk, wounded 1. Artillery hit the fire station in Lipty, setting the building on fire and damaging rescue equipment. No emergency services employees were injured. The VKS bombed Kostiantynivka in the Donetsk Oblast, wounding 1 civilian and damaging apartment buildings. Ivan Fedorov, the head of the Zaporizhia Oblast military administration, reported that a Russian SRBM hit, quote, critical infrastructure in the city of Zaporizhia. There were no casualties. Across the Kyiv region, unexploded submunitions from the Kh-101 cruise missiles shot down on the night of June the 11th and the 12th were found scattered across the city of Vasilkiv. Serhiy Lysak, head of Dnipropetrovsk Oblast military administration, reported that during last night's air raid, drone debris fell in the Sinelnikovo district, causing minor injuries to a family, including a 13-year-old boy. Almost 24 Russian one-way drones struck the Nikopol region, wounding a 17-year-old boy who is in hospital. Here is today's action report. Russia's spring-summer offensive completed its 53rd day, with 98 assaults carried out on Tuesday and 89 through Wednesday evening. Through June the 11th, the 7-day moving average for attacks dropped to 96, the lowest level since April the 23rd, and down 30% from the May the 17th peak of 136. The average number of attacks is only 5% higher than when the offensive started on April the 20th, and a clear bell curve has developed. In our assessment, Russia's current offensive has ended. The General Staff of the Armed Forces of Ukraine reported that Russia suffered 980 casualties, falling below 1,000 for the first time since April the 25th. This is another data signal that the large-scale offensive is over. The 7-day moving average for Russian casualties peaked on May the 17th at 1,451, which was the same day the number of Russian attacks peaked. While the current offensive has ended, it does not mean that Ukraine now has the battlefield initiative or that Russia is incapable of making additional tactical advances. In the past 24 hours, Russia made tactical gains in the direction of Progress and Sokil and advanced to the southern edge of Nevelske again. Based on terrain analysis, we believe that Ukrainian forces have withdrawn from the area south of Pervomaiska. Ukrainian forces also withdrew out of the northwestern part of Staromayorsk, with Russian forces taking control of the settlement. Additionally, the situation in Krasnohorivka has deteriorated, with fighting for control of the high-rises in the eastern part of the settlement ongoing. Now, for the assessment of the day from our analyst team. In less than 2 weeks, the US decision to permit Ukraine to strike within the 1991 borders of Russia changed the dynamics of the Lipsy-Vovchansk area of operation, or EO. Ukraine carried out suppress and destroy enemy air defense missions targeting electronic warfare systems, radars, and air defense batteries in the Belgorod region. The strikes not only all but fully stopped S-300 missile strikes on Kharkiv, they enabled Ukraine to re-establish air superiority temporarily. Russian positions are bombed with GBU-39 bombs with JDAM kits and AASM Hammer bombs provided by France, while helicopters conduct close air support. The challenge for Russia's air defense is when they activate their radar to target Ukrainian aviation, they are exposed to attack by anti-radiation missiles. Due to the increasing losses, radars are increasingly left off. Without radars to track aircraft, Russian S-300 batteries in Belgorod are blind. It raises the question: what if the NATO alliance and other allies didn't slowly trickle in air defense systems for Ukraine? And what if the restrictions on striking targets within the 1991 borders of Russia never existed? In our assessment, more Ukrainians would be alive, and there would be less destruction. And just a personal opinion, I truly hope the world realizes that Russia-Ukraine war is not a macabre video game or a vicious reality show. Ukrainians are not mere numbers and statistics, but flesh and blood people with plans and dreams, and with a desire to live full lives instead of day-by-day survival. I do hope we still have time for our common efforts to make this world a better place. Now let's talk about what happened on the battlefield. Ready? Here we go. Starting in the Kharkiv Oblast, we begin in the Lipsy-Vovchansk EO. Fighting continued in Vovchansk, mostly in the northwestern part of the settlement. The General Staff of the Armed Forces of Ukraine, or GSAFU, reported a Russian assault in the area of Tykhe was repulsed. The Ukrainian 82nd Air Assault Brigade released a video showing the platoon-sized Russian assault supported by armor was eliminated by drone-dropped IEDs and artillery strikes. We expanded the grey area in the direction of Tykhe and adjusted the line of conflict, but we do not believe this is a part of a larger new offensive effort. We also adjusted the line of conflict in the northwestern part of the settlement based on new intelligence. Comparing Sentinel-2 L2A satellite images from June the 1st to June the 9th on the Sentinel Hub EO browser, we see Russian troops have started construction of static defenses 2,500 meters from the recognized international border north of Vovchansk. Partial cloud cover restricted our ability to assess the extent of the work done. Russian sources reported fighting continued in Hlyboke, where Ukrainian forces remained on the offensive. A Ukrainian strike on an electrical substation in the Belgorod region knocked out power to 15 villages and settlements. In the Kupiansk EO, Russian forces attempted to advance in the direction of Petropavlivka from Vilshana and Peshchane without success. In the Svatovo EO of the Luhansk Oblast, Russian forces tried to advance on Myasozharivka, suffered losses and retreated. Fighting also continued between occupied Novovodane and Druzhelyubivka, with no change in the situation. In the Crimea EO, Russian forces continued their attempts to advance in the direction of Nevske and launched 12 attacks in the direction of Terny. None of the assaults were successful. Fighting also continued in the Serebryanka forest. The Commander-in-Chief of the Armed Forces of Ukraine, Colonel General Oleksandr Syrsky, reported fighting continued near Bilogorivka, writing the defensive effort is, quote, an eloquent example of the resilience of the Ukrainian army in the Luhansk region. Let's talk about the Donbass and the northeastern part of the Donetsk Oblast. In the Siversk EO, Russian forces shifted their attacks to Spirne, where an attempt to advance was repulsed. Russian forces also tried to advance in the direction of Rozdolivka, suffered losses and retreated to their defensive positions. There wasn't much information from the Kostiantynivka EO. Ukrainian and Russian sources reported that fighting continued in the Canal district of Chasiv Yar, with no major changes. GSAFU reported that fighting continued in Ivanivsk. In the southwestern part of the Donetsk Oblast, Russian forces carried out 31 assaults in the Avdiivka EO, where they continued to make marginal and tactical gains. Fighting continued in Novo-Oleksandrivka. There were no new Russian advances, but Ukrainian troops had not stabilized their defensive lines. Russian forces made new marginal gains in the direction of Progress, Yevgenivka and Sokil. While Russian troops were pushed out of the eastern part of Sokil earlier in the week, the situation is increasingly difficult. Russian forces also made an additional advance into Novopokrovsk. It is unclear if they were able to consolidate their gains. Fighting continued north and southeast of Novoselivka-Persha. Russian mercenary mill blogger Wogonzo reported fighting was ongoing east of Yasnobrodivka. Ukrainian and Russian sources reported fighting continued between Netailova and Karlivka. Wogonzo walked back their early claim of a successful wet crossing of the Vovcha River and the occupation of the Karlivka dachas on the south bank of the Karlovsky Reservoir. Ukrainian source Deep State reported that Russian troops entered the southern part of the village of Nevelske. In the occupied city of Donetsk, a Fab-250 UMPK glide bomb landed directly next to Hospital 14, but did not detonate. At least, they can't blame Ukraine for bombing the Donbass. Fighting continued in the Vuhledar EO, with the situation deteriorating in Krasnogorivka. Russian forces reached the southwestern outskirts of the settlement yesterday, and there are reliable reports of a deeper advance from the east to the apartment building towers. Fighting for control was ongoing. Russian assaults east of Georgiivka were repulsed. We are renaming the Staromlynivka AO to the Vremivka AO due to the recent Russian advances. Based on new information, we've moved the line of conflict north of Staromayorsk and coded the settlement as under Russian control. GSAFU reported that Russian troops attempted to advance deeper into Urozhaine and were unsuccessful. In the village of Polyvyane, a Russian missile strike destroyed an S-300 air defense launcher and radar. While the video quality is poor, the air defense missiles cooking off were clearly observed. And west of occupied Yalinsk, a Russian one-way drone destroyed a Russian Zoopark 1M counter-battery radar. Satellite images showed the results of the ATACMS missile strikes on occupied Crimea. In Rubinivka, a Podlyot K-1 radar, part of an S-400 anti-aircraft battery, was destroyed, and at least one missile launcher was damaged. In Velike, a 5N-63S fire control radar for an S-300 anti-aircraft battery was destroyed. GSAFU reported that on the night of June the 11th and the 12th, an S-300 air defense battery near Belbek military airfield and two S-400 air defense batteries near Belbek and Sevastopol were hit by ATACMS missiles. It was reported that two more radars were destroyed, and the status of the third was still being verified. The Black Sea Fleet has two vessels on patrol, including a Kilo-class submarine capable of launching Kalibr cruise missiles. In the Sea of Azov, there were 11 vessels on patrol, including 3 missile frigates capable of launching 24 Kalibr cruise missiles.
You're listening to the Malcontent News Russia-Ukraine War Podcast. Our team of journalists, researchers, and analysts is funded by readers, listeners, and viewers just like you. To support independent journalism, please consider becoming a patron. You can find us on patreon.com/malcontentnews.
Here is my Theaterwide update. The Special Operation Forces of Ukraine destroyed a Russian R416GM communications relay with a one-way drone. Introduced in 2018, this was the first confirmed loss of the rare mobile communication station. The United States Treasury issued sweeping sanctions on over 300 individuals and entities due to Russia's transition to a full war economy. Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen said, quote, "Today's actions strike at their remaining avenues for international materials and equipment, including their reliance on critical supplies from third countries. We are increasing the risk for financial institutions dealing with Russia's war economy and eliminating paths for evasion, and diminishing Russia's ability to benefit from access to foreign technology, equipment, software, and IT services." Unquote. A partial list of newly sanctioned companies and entities include the Moscow Exchange, better known as MOEX, Russia's largest public trading market for foreign exchange. Entities involved with Russia's Obsky, Arctic 1 and Arctic 3 liquefied natural gas projects. The Sudakov gold laundering network, including entities and companies based in the UAE and Hong Kong. Russia-based LLC Unmanned Systems, which bypasses sanctions for the design and production of drones. And Yevgenia Gutsul, the pro-Kremlin governor of Moldova's autonomous territorial unit of Gagauzia. In response to the sanctions on MOEX, the exchange suspended trading of the euro and US dollar immediately after the US announcement. Russians stood in long lines at currency exchanges, fearful that the value of the ruble would collapse. This morning, users could not access online banking for Rosbank and Gazprombank. At the time the script was written, officially the ruble was off by only 2%, rising to 91.2 for $1. Unofficially, the exchange rate is closer to 120. And one should also keep in mind that yesterday was a state holiday in Russia. Real consequences are yet to be estimated. The president of Argentina, Javier Milei, announced he was seeking permission to transfer 5 Dassault Breguet Super Étendard Modernise fighter aircraft to Ukraine. The French airplanes were designed for carrier operations, which theoretically would make them capable of operating on improvised runways. These are advanced Generation 3 fighters that originally entered service within 3 years of the MiG-29. The 5 aircraft were purchased from France in 2017 and had undergone extensive upgrades in the 1990s and early 2000s. They never entered service with the Argentinian Air Force because the required spare parts were never delivered due to a British embargo. The United Kingdom is expected to announce a $310 million assistance package at the G7 summit in Italy. Prime Minister Rishi Sunak said the package is for, quote, immediate humanitarian, energy and stabilization needs. U.S. National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan said that negotiations with Ukraine had concluded and a bilateral security agreement would be signed on June 13th at the G7 summit. Quote, this agreement does not include any commitment to using our own forces to defend Ukraine. It is a pledge to ensure Ukraine can defend itself. Wait, did Jake Sullivan finally stop being timid? U.S. news agency CNN reported the agreement is less robust than a security cooperation agreement and can be nullified by presidential decree. The agreement is, quote, expected to commit the U.S. for 10 years to continue training of Ukraine's armed forces, more cooperation in the production of weapons and military equipment, the continued provision of military assistance, and greater intelligence sharing, unquote. A decision to provide Ukraine with $50 billion in loans secured by frozen Russian assets in Western banks has reportedly been reached by the G7 nations. The decision is expected to be announced at the G7 summit, with implementation resolved by the end of 2024. Lithuania is sending 14 additional M113 armored personnel carriers with enhanced demining capabilities to Ukraine. The first 4 armored combat support vehicles from Canada have arrived in Europe for transfer to Ukraine. 50 have been ordered, with the first 4 being transferred for training purposes. The next 6 will be ambulance variants, and the remaining 40 will be configured as armored personnel carriers and logistics vehicles. And that's what we know. Your support of my home, Ukraine, helps us make history and protect the future for all.
You've been listening to the Malcontent News Russia-Ukraine War podcast. To help keep us independent, please consider providing financial support by becoming a patron. Want on-demand news in your hand? Download the Google News app and make Malcontent News one of your favorites to receive breaking news updates. Thank you for listening.